Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to those of you on the West Coast, and welcome to today's webinar on remote culture shift, 6 tips to keep your remote culture intact. My name is Charles Summers. It is my pleasure to be serving as your moderator today. We've got a 45-minute presentation before a 15-minute Q&A at the end, so if you have any questions at any time during today's presentation, please use the GoToWebinar questions queue, and we'll answer them during that Q&A session. We find an opportunity to answer a question or two as we go. We'll jump in and answer those as well. If you'd like to reach out to me about any Humantelligence, webinar questions, or future webinar topics, feel free to reach out to me directly at charles.summers@humantelligence.com. Per usual, we'll give you some quick advice that you can start using today, talk about some tools that can help, and give you a sneak peek at how Humantelligence can help you. Here's a couple of things that you can try out that will help keep your culture in a remote or hybrid environment intact. First, from remoteworkscorecard.com, you can take our free remote work assessment for yourself or for a team and get a diagnostic look at strengths and weaknesses and align your organization with remote work. Somebody actually just asked a question about that a moment ago, so you can actually use that tool for the benchmarks for remote work. We'll dive into your question a little bit more here in a little bit. Also, you can assess, manage, and hire for culture with Humantelligence. You can try it out with a small team for free by going to our website and signing up from our homepage. If you're interested in a tour of Humantelligence, head on over to humantelligence.com/request a demo. Once I hand things off here to Juan, I will put a link to these items in the chat, and I'll also send them out after the webinar with the recording and slide deck. Just keep in mind, as I put things in the chat, they do disappear after a few minutes. So if you want the slides or any of these other links, make sure you pick those up here in about a minute when I hand it off. At this time, I'd like to introduce you to today's presenter, Humantelligence CEO, Juan Betancourt. Right now, I'm going to go ahead and hand things off to Juan, and I'll go ahead and put those links in the chat. So Juan, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Charles, and thanks everyone for joining today. Hope that you guys get a lot from today's webinar, that things that are not just conceptual, but also actionable. So today's agenda, we're going to go through the goal of today, the poll with you, the audience of over 200 people and still increasing. We have about 450 registered people today. So it'll be really interesting to get everybody's feedback from such a wide variety of people. We're going to then talk about common remote and hybrid challenges of working remote in the hybrid environment. And then the real meat of the presentation, we'll go through 6 actionable tips to support remote work. So our research team here and our marketing team, Victoria Guzzo and others, went out and looked at dozens, if not 30 or 40 of the most highly acclaimed articles and thought leaders on remote work. She also interviewed several leaders at companies who do this and are leading in this to kind of synthesize to 6 specific things of the hundreds they read about that really seem to be very effective, but very simple to put in place. So whether you're a small company or a large Fortune 500, these are things that are easy, actionable, and not expensive to do. Then we're going to go into the 7-step framework to using technology for culture. A lot of people misunderstand technology and just assume the more tech you use, the less human or people-oriented a company is. And if it's the wrong tech, that is correct. But there is technology, and we'll show you some examples that actually make a work environment, both in person as well as remote, especially remote, more human, more intentional, where people actually can understand each other and where technology can infuse emotional intelligence that takes 2-dimensional names and screens and turns them into more vibrant, vibrational exchanges and connections, not just transactions. And then we'll finish with Q&A from all of you in the audience. So today's goal, we want to provide you with actionable tips on addressing remote culture and the hybrid situation as well, and help you plan long-term remote or hybrid culture more intentionally.
All right, so that's going to bring us to our first poll here. So give me just a moment to pull that up. Okay, so you should see that start populating on your screen here in just a few seconds. Okay, so the question is, in the long term, is your organization planning to go remote, hybrid, or be entirely in the office? If you don't know the answer, you can hit not sure, haven't decided. And Juan, just so you know, there's a couple of questions in there already. If you want to take a look at the questions queue, I think these will probably come up naturally as we're talking today. But just take a look at those. I think we could probably answer those as we're going. We'll give it about 15 more seconds. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close it up here. And you should see the results on your screen now. All right, so to the question, in the long term, is your organization planning to go remote, hybrid, or entirely in the office? 5% said remote entirely, 82% said hybrid, 3% said office, and 9% said not sure. Juan, did you want to speak to that just a little bit?
Yeah, I think this is starting to look more common than not. You know, a lot of companies have said going 100% remote is probably not the best idea, but giving the choice to employees to be a combination of in the office, out of the office, in that hybrid 82% that we see here is consistent. I mean, everyone on this webinar, if you take a look in the mirror and ask yourself, now that I've taken a bite of the apple of not commuting 1 to 2 hours each way to work and saving 10 to 20 hours a week of downtime, wasted time, boring time, risking my life in a car, in traffic, that I can now use half that time to see the light after the workday and still be able to do exercise or something with my family and even work longer and still have time left over in that same 40-hour work week. I think, you know, that explains why most people, if you're an employee, would want to stay working remote or at least a hybrid version. Next.
Yeah, and this is not a small sample size either. There's over 200 people responded to that poll, so it's definitely a trend for sure. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and hide the results and move us into our next slide and kick it back to you here, Juan.
So will businesses ever return, you know, to business as usual? In terms of the employee perspective, so this is not a survey of companies, but this is a survey of employees. 50% of employees expect to work remotely at least part of the time after this pandemic subsides. So before COVID, remember there was that, you know, Friday work from home, which actually seems funny now because it was such an anomaly and seen as like the people who were shirked work and were lazy, and that was like a benefit. Well, now that's really becoming the standard, and now post-pandemic, half of people believe that they're going to actually stay in a remote work or hybrid environment, and probably more than just that 1 day a week on Fridays. Beep. We did a little research and found that many large companies and logos, brands that you and I use and love and know, are already moving to a hybrid or permanently remote work environment. So we have REI, we have Twitter, we have Nationwide, Zillow, Salesforce, State Farm, Google, Capital One, Microsoft, Deloitte, JP Morgan, and many, many more have already announced that this is going to be the way they operate long term. So what are the common challenges? You have challenges of communication, collaboration, inclusiveness, right? For DE and I, this is a big one, inclusiveness, and not so much around race or religion, but really around, I think one person already asked the question around inclusiveness, those who are at work versus those who aren't, is that equitable? And how do you include non-work physical work participants, both in meetings and in promotions, and being part of, you know, the workforce in an equal way? And then culture challenges, right? If people are further from the headquarters, further from a place they're all at, how do you maintain culture in a remote or hybrid environment? These are the challenges that we are going to help address today.
Yep, sorry for cutting you off. Yeah, so just to mention one thing on inclusiveness too, we actually did an entire webinar on remote inclusiveness and equity in late January. So we can also include that link in our follow-up materials as well. So, all right, I'm going to kick it back to you here, Juan.
Perfect. So here are the 6 tips to intentionally support remote work today. First tip, equalize to engage, right? So one of the insights here is, before you read the bullet points, I'm going to discuss where this comes from. What they found was it's really unintentional in terms of team members who are physically on site are likely to get more attention from leaders than those off-site. If you remember back in the day, remember those meetings, you'd sit in a conference room and there'd be 6 people and 1 or 2 people would dial in. It feels like it was 20 years ago, right, before Zoom and COVID. But the dialing in people, let's say the 2 out of the 8 members of the meeting, always seemed kind of not really part of it and not really engaged, and not because they weren't trying, but because they weren't physically in the meeting. So it is unintentional. And so to prevent that, and that insight, which is a really powerful one, when that was presented to me as one of the key findings in a paper they found, the output, which is tip number 1, makes sense. So to level the meeting playing field, if there is a meeting that involves workers both in the office and offsite, maybe instead of having on-site employees sit in a conference room for the meeting, have everyone, both on-site and off-site, log into a virtual meeting through Zoom or WebEx or Teams, or whichever the technology, from whenever they are. That way, from wherever they are. That way, everybody is the same and everybody is on equal footing and nobody feels left out. Try it. It's not for everyone, but that could work to alleviate that and help equalize the playing field. Second, actively increase efficiencies. What does that mean? Don't make assumptions about silence, okay? So if someone's not speaking, it doesn't mean they support or don't support something. You might want to actually say their name and solicit input from them. This also makes the meeting leaders think twice about who needs to be involved, since they'll be actually asking people to participate actively. And you'll then optimize the number of participants for greatest efficiency. Tip number 2, solicit guidelines from feedback. So the most important thing that our team found researching was that whatever policies you're going to put in place, you need to engage your team members and get feedback from them. You need to rely on their input to create both the operational and pro-collaboration guidelines in place, because buy-in from your team will be critical to success and for their engagement. So maybe do a quick survey and ask for feedback. So put together kind of a skeleton idea. So don't make it completely white, blank. Hey, what do you think we should do? But maybe give them options and get their feedback on those different options that you present to figure out best when and how team members in your company, in your team would like to collaborate. It is different for every team and every team member. And so even within, let's say, a large company like Coca-Cola that has a very well-defined culture, if you will, maybe the people doing Zoom and remote work and hybrid in the finance and accounting department would have a very different way of wanting to collaborate remote and hybrid than the people in the marketing department, who, for example, would need to do a lot more creative things and need different technology to do those kind of idea creation, ideation online. Second bullet point, synthesize and review. Compile and put your new team policies into a shared document or tool so that everyone can see them. Make them transparent. That makes it much more authentic. And commit to a scheduled review and revision with everyone and your team to learn more about what works and what doesn't. That way you get everyone's buy-in and nobody feels like it's being forced upon them. And the third bullet point, resist the urge to impose your own ideas. We all as leaders often think we know what might be best, but often you're projecting your own needs, concerns into those ideas. So establish these policies only after careful consideration and with diverse input from your team. Tip number 3, shift communication expectations. promote asynchronous communication. So what does that mean? It doesn't have to be in real time while you're talking to someone, while you're on the phone, while you're in a meeting with Zoom. You might want to ask people to communicate and create space, hold space, create the intention that it's okay for people to get back to you after the Zoom meeting or WebEx meeting or Teams meeting. So a driving force behind successful remote teams, from what my research and our research team found, was that it helps focus on important work and collaborate more thoughtfully. The emphasis on the word thoughtfully. Always asking people real time on Zoom their feedback or what do you think might not be as powerful as having people come back to you by the end of the day or the next day in a thoughtful written email. It just lends to more thoughtfulness in that perspective of your team members. And so that's what asynchronous communication is where you don't just do it real time on the spot, but are able to have people write to each other and send information and responses outside of the meeting. So in the 3 bullet points, encourage the use of do not disturb mode in your team communication tools, set clear and realistic expectations around email response times. So if you do ask somebody for their feedback later, put an end date and time. So, you know, in the end of a meeting when you assign next steps and who does what by when, if somebody volunteers to bring more information or ideas or thoughts, but they're going to give the feedback to the team or the leader or to you by Friday at 2 p.m. Be very specific, otherwise things kind of drift on forever and you don't have closure. Or misaligned expectations, which is point 2, setting those clear and realistic expectations around response times. Point 3, to designate a specific channel for real emergencies or crisis that require immediate response. So, you know, Microsoft Outlook has an exclamation point. Slack, you can create a crisis channel for urgent things. Teams as well, WebEx team channels as well. So I think even Facebook Workplace has the same. So try to create those channels for urgent and crisis mode type communication.
Yeah, and Juan, I'm just going to jump in here real quick because I've got a handful of questions to address. So any questions on content? There's a handful that will fit in at the end of the 6 tips, and then we'll jump into our second half. So we'll get to those in a second. I see a few questions just asking about the slide deck and the recording. So I put the slide deck. It's in the handout section of your control panel. It's also in the chat along with the other links that I mentioned earlier in our introduction. So you can find those there. The video recording will be sent out later this afternoon or this evening. Look for an email from me directly. All right, Juan, I'll kick it back to you here.
Okay. Tip number 4, connect for quality. So when you connect and collaborate, actively connect. And what does that mean? When team members are physically together, informally interacting before meetings or during lunch helps make work more fun and rewarding. Let's not forget that we are human and there is an energetic connection that occurs when you're next to someone, in front of someone. However, now with back-to-back video calls, agendas are so back-to-back, they're stripped of those moments to transact in a meaningful way. And it really can lead, from what our research team found, to people and team members feeling isolated. So if you aren't able to meet in person anymore and you are back-to-back on meetings, maybe create space at the beginning or the end of a meeting for a fun fact or a question to the meeting agenda where everybody can answer it and get to know each other on a more personal basis or a more laid-back basis. Designate, for example, 1 day a week for department lunch over Zoom, right? Where you don't talk about work, where it really is just learning about each other and exchanging in a non-work environment. That goes a long way to kind of connecting within your group. There was a poll of 1,000 professionals where the highest result in terms of pain point was losing this connection to team members and feeling isolated. So whether or not you like this tip on how to do it, try to find other ways, because that is going to be the #1 problem of remote and hybrid, is people feel isolated. So every company, every leader, every HR department really needs to figure out some tips for their employees to solve that #1 challenge that is occurring across the world in a remote and hybrid work environment. You know, we all know that if you are able to create laughter on a call, it just lightens everything up and allows people to feel more informal and more authentic, which always leads to better collaboration instead of the stiff formalities that we see often on those first Zoom calls. Beep. Tip number 5, lead by example. Monkey see, monkey do. Employees take notice of what you say and what you do, and so you must also align to what they expect from you. So people, leaders, and executive management should lead by example for their remote teams. So for example, if you take time, if you expect them to take time off and you encourage that, and you don't take time off, they're going to be confused by that and often feel awkward or maybe stressed when they do take that vacation if their boss isn't. If you tell your employees you're concerned that they're working too late now that it's remote and they start at 7 and finish at 9, and work on weekends, which is so easy now in the remote hybrid environment because we all now have workstations at home. It's easy to just pop in that computer and turn it on. And if they see you saying it's okay not to work weekends, but then getting 100 emails on the weekends from you, they're going to feel obliged, you know, they're your subordinate, to do the same. There's also the example of, you know, and the what is that word? The challenge or the question around, do you turn your video on or off on a Zoom call? If there's a leader that believes, and much research shows that for the best engagement in team meetings on Zoom or WebEx or Microsoft Teams or other video conference technologies, if the leader says, we want everyone to have their camera on, and then that leader does not do it, it doesn't send a good signal, and you're probably going to very soon thereafter not have many people with their camera on. Research has shown that meetings are more collaborative, more engaging, the more people who turn their cameras on. Obviously, that's a sensitive topic, and some people don't feel comfortable because they don't have the environment at home to be able to do that, and it's not fair and it's not an equal playing field. But if you do have a workspace and you are able to kind of keep non-work things in your background, it really is encouraged to have your camera on, because that leads to more collaboration and more productivity and more trust, if you will. Step 6, leverage technology for a quick start. So keeping score, what do we mean by that? Well, use a remote work scorecard. Yes, there are scorecards, assessments, quick quizzes that are out there now, 10, 15 minutes that you can give to your team members and get a remote work scorecard for each person and the team that empowers the leader and each team member to quickly understand how they themselves and their colleagues work remotely. Let me explain a little further. We had a client, a call center with over 8,000 agents, where they had very clear defined who their top performers were in that call center. Then they went remote. This is before COVID. They just wanted to save money on real estate and had everyone work remotely. And what they found was that their high performers in the office at that call center ended up often being their worst performers when they went remote. And some of their worst performers in the office became the best at adapting for a remote work environment. And so, you know, it's like any sport. For those of you who played soccer, it's a big field with 11 players. Some of the best big field players, 11 on 11. If you play small field, you know, small cones, 2-foot goals with 4v4, The best players in the big field sometimes become the worst players on the small field and vice versa. That's why you don't see many great soccer players from indoor soccer being great at outdoor soccer, or that sport in Europe and Latin America called futsal. And there's a reason for it, because it's a different culture of playing, if you will. And just like that, different companies and different employees will work better remote than others. And so there are scorecards to see where your strengths are, and so that you're not left to not performing well, but will tell you where you might be weaker and that you can develop that area. And so to bullet point 2, gain insights into those 8 characteristics that do measure your ability to adapt to work remote or not, and then see your scorecard, and managers can see the scorecards. So everyone can kind of get a better understanding of their psychometrics, their behaviors, their motivators, and their work styles. And of those 8 things, what tends to work well or not in a remote work environment, and how you can kind of buttress and support where you might be weaker in the red, yellow, green type scorecard way of assessing yourself, and as a leader, your team. Third bullet, leverage recommendations for influencing, communicating, and increasing engagement and productivity. Continual research out there on how to do remote work is going to be upgraded and advanced. We've only been doing this for 6 months effectively. There will still be lots of case studies and learnings on how to improve remote work. So you shouldn't just assume that what you have today is your steady state for 6 months out. Next. So connecting the dots to unlock value for working remote or hybrid. We've gone over all 6 of these. So equalize the playing field so everyone can contribute equally. Solicit feedback. When you do guidelines, collectively get that from your employees, and that will help them be more engaged. Shift expectations, right? This was all around the asynchronous communications. Not everything has to be real time on a Zoom. Feel free and encourage your employees and your team members to take a little more time and write more than 20-character Twitter type emails, right? Write a 1-page memo in an email with all of your thought on the pros and the cons, and expect people to actually read them. And don't be judging if someone writes a longer email that's well structured with a lot of thought. Some of the best work is done in solitude, not on a Zoom video call. Connect for quality, right? Whether one-on-one or with the team or all hands, it's more important to prioritize quality in order to have more energetic and fruitful interaction than just transactions. Model behaviors, right? If you model the behaviors of people and teams and what works and doesn't for your group, you will have more productivity and less burnout and fatigue. And again, at the end, use technology to keep score, not in a negative penalizing way, but more like any team or athlete or well-run company measures things not to criticize, but to improve, because if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. Psychometrics today with technology allow individuals and teams to understand where they are in their emotional intelligence quotient, their EQ, or if you will, technically the EI, to see how they can improve work for themselves and for and with teams remotely.
All right, I'm going to jump in here. Okay, so we're at the 29-minute mark here. I understand that some people have to go to meetings, so I'll just mention one more time. This is recorded. You will get an email from me with the recording and the slides later on this afternoon or this evening. And then I have a handful of questions here, Juan, to just kind of put a break in the action here as we have 30 minutes left. So we've got plenty of time here to take some questions before we jump into some of the tech framework. So, all right. So perfect question, actually, for the first one, because you just got done talking about this. Do you suggest scorecards help determine who should and shouldn't be working remotely, and how much or often, or how often?
That's a great question. So these kind of scorecards give an assessment, a very objective assessment on who's going to struggle working remote. You have to balance the company need of putting people where their strongest skills are with what the individual wants. So an example, so there's no mandated rule or what works best. Obviously, if the company finds, that Mary and Steve and Javier are best working remote, and Mary, Steve, and Javier want to work remote, then you have a great solution and everybody's a win-win. But let's say that Mark and Mohammed are not good at working remote, but they want to. Well, the great thing about these scorecards, it gives tips on how you can get them to work well remote, even though their natural tendencies not to. And so I think you have to kind of combine what the employees want. To be fair and equitable, you can't force people to work remote or not, unless they have obviously COVID and they can't come in. But if they're healthy, you really can't say you have to stay out or come in. And so these scorecards allow you to kind of get the right information for that optimal balance.
Cool. All right. So the next question that I have here, Juan, is can you talk more about connecting for quality? What should we be considering to determine if these connections are of quality?
Yeah, so in terms of connecting for quality, I think one thing that, for example, our company does that in our research came up is, before every meeting, we, on one-on-ones on Zoom for the weekly meetings I have with my team, I ask for their mood meter, 0 to 10, every week on my one-on-ones, what's your mood meter, both personally and professionally? And let's say 0 to 10, they're always like at an 8. And then on the personally, they say they're a 4. It opens the floor to quickly ask before my one-on-one starts, well, why are you a 4? And, maybe somebody just had a child and they're a preemie in the NICU, for example. So it's good to kind of keep that personal connection with the people close to you at work, your team members, subordinates, or peers, by asking kind of a mood meter up front. That's what we do. It seems pretty effective. You also get a great pulse on the team because you start to see every week, and I track these, right? I have a little place where I track it, and you see somebody's always at 8.88, 8.5, 9, and also maybe they're at 7. Well, you should address that before you just go over the weekly agenda that you typically go over. We do the same thing for our company of 20 employees. We have a monthly all hands on deck where it's basically 1 minute on a personal mood meter for all 20 employees, 1 minute on a personal fun fact about yourself that other people in the company might not know, 1 minute on a professional accomplishment you just completed in the last month, and in that same minute, your biggest challenge or project for the month. We have, product development, marketing, customer success, engineers, and several other people, sales, SDRs, marketing. They don't work together with the other 18 employees often. And so it's a great way of keeping kind of a community feeling and a family feeling, something that with 20 people in 20 different locations usually is hard to do. And so there's really fun and creative ways that you can kind of connect with quality and not just transactionally to get through the agenda and move on to the next meeting. I think those are some helpful examples, but I think on that one, it's really going to be creative solutions for every company and every team with what the members like best. So those ideas, for instance, in my team didn't come from me. I actually took a survey and got like 30 ideas from my 20 team members, and we picked 5 to implement, and it's been great. It really has changed the fabric and the connection and the vibration and feeling of community intentionally throughout my team. Next.
Yeah, and Juan, to that same point, as I mentioned earlier, we did an entire webinar on, how to connect, how to put everybody in more equitable situations and how to meet better. That was a big part of that webinar that we did. So we'll send that link out to everybody as well. Actually, it looks like just put part of it there. Okay, cool. So I've got another question here. You covered part of it earlier, Juan, and I think we're probably going to cover more of it in the tech part. But do you have any kind of benchmarking data or resources that you could point us to regarding remote and hybrid work?
Yeah. So Charles, please write in the chat for everyone to go to www.remoteworkscorecard.com. And if you go to that website, okay, last year we spent hundreds of hours collecting all the best remote work articles. So remoteworkscorecard.com. If you go to the top, there's the menu bar with resources and articles and a download remote work guide. So we did the download remote work guide, so that's kind of the best of. But if you want all the articles and all the resources from all the top places. I mean, this took hundreds of hours to go through probably 2,000 articles to get to the top 50 or 60. I haven't found a better resource to go through. If you're managing remote work at your companies, to look through these, this is a treasure trove of information. Again, it's objective, it's third party, it's not Humantelligence. You won't see anything about our company in that tab under resources and articles. So that could really be helpful for you. And you can take the Humantelligence remote work scorecard test there and give it to some of your employees as well while we're at it, if you're there and you're interested. And it is free to do that one test.
All right, next question here. For these hybrid meetings, would you suggest house rules? Sorry. So examples: everybody must be on camera, cell phone, email off. So any quick tips that you can give there, Juan?
Yeah, I think just like when you're, presenting in a live audience, you have the rules around mobile phones off. I think you do set some guidelines and you do get feedback, right? You create the guidelines if you're the leader or the meeting organizer, and you send them out before the meeting and say, hey, this is what we're thinking about for the guidelines and all of these meetings for this work task force that we're going to meet every week, or for our team that meets monthly or weekly, and see if there's any kind of controversial ones. The most controversial one that our team found in the research is keeping camera on, right? A lot of individuals, about 20%, feel offended that they have to keep their camera on if they're at home. It's their personal home space. They don't want to share what that looks like. They don't have the money, and the company hasn't paid for a green screen or the technology to have those cool things behind, or maybe they have a lot of kids playing in the background. That's not their fault that they have a large family. So everybody gets that, right? All the studies show, though, for a company and the company needs, where there are more people's cameras on, the meetings are much more collaborative, much more productive. So if you really do want to optimize productivity and quality of connection, cameras should be on. So I think it's a balance in respecting individual needs with what leads to the best output or meeting. And so I think you kind of sensitively create some guidelines, send them out before the first meeting, get feedback individually. Don't do an email to 20 people and have all that become like a back and forth on email. Copy and paste the email, or do a blind CC and ask people just to reply to you. If it's blind CC, that's all they can do. And then you collect that and go back to the group and say, hey, here's what the group decided. 90% want cameras on. So for the 1 in 10 of us that didn't, feel free to keep it off. But most people, 9 of us, expect cameras on. So if you can, that'd be great. Something like that, done in the right way, will probably lead to the most optimal balance of individual needs and personal constraints and company, productivity optimization.
Thanks, Juan. All right, so we do need to get back to our slides here. We've got a handful more questions. We'll handle those in the Q&A session here in just a few minutes. But Juan, I'm going to go ahead and bring you to the next slide here.
Great. So let's take a deeper dive into the technology that can be used for helping with remote work and hybrid work. And we're not talking about setting up Zoom or WebEx or Microsoft Teams. That's like so 2020, right, in the shock and awe of when COVID hit. This is more about technologies and plugins such as Humantelligence and others that really optimize remote work and hybrid work. So with psychometric technology now that's embedded into your work fabric and workflows, and even integrated into your current technologies, whether it's HRIS systems like SuccessFactors or Workday and others, there's 4 steps really on establishing a culture of performance. First, you need to measure what at Humantelligence we call the BMW framework. We are seen as the BMW of all assessments. You need to measure the behaviors, so your typical strength finders, Gallup, predictive index, DISC, MBTI, Myers-Briggs, et cetera. Those are behaviors. Motivators, or what some companies call values. So this is your Hogans, your Lomingers, a little more expensive ones. And the work energizers, what gives people energy in an environment, the culture environment, right? You can have two people with the same DISC or predictive index or in motivators, Hogan, one and at the same company in the same job, where one is miserable and one is happy, yet they have the exact same behaviors and motivators. Well, what's the difference? What gives them energy? Maybe one person gets energy from a structured environment and another from a creative environment. So you really need this three-legged perspective of BMW, not just B, not just M, and not just BM, but all three of them to really optimize the understanding of people in both a in-office and remote environment. Step two, you then need to define what do you want for that team or that role. So if it is a sales role where it's closing a lot of small deals every day in 30-minute meetings, right? You probably want a very decisive behavioral person whose value is, low salary, high commission, focus on making money quickly, right? So they don't waste time, right? Versus another salesperson who's selling $10 million GE medical, hospital devices for MRIs, and that person, it's a 2-year deal, right? Or a year sales cycle where they have to almost be knowledge-based and very long-term and deliberate, not decisive, not really care about the money and checking a box, but really about solving this problem around identifying cancer and that being a real motivator and value driver, right? So very different behaviors and motivators and work styles for different roles, even in sales. So you can now define for the role or for the team what you want in step two, and then in step three, see and map out your current team or your current sales organization or whatever the role on how similar or different and what that gap is with that target. And so in most things in business, you put a target, a goal, and you see the gap today and you work towards it. First time ever with tools like Humantelligence and others, you can do the same exercise with the culture of a functional area like sales, marketing, finance, accounting, customer success, trading, manufacturing, auto line, and identify the target and help each of those people in step 4 get there with personalized plans, as well as helping the leaders see the target, where their current group or team is, and where the blind spots, strengths, and weaknesses are in their journey to get there. And so it's a much more intentional way of establishing a culture and getting there. The best example that I know is our own company at Humantelligence. When we started 5 years ago, I hired everyone who was extremely creative, right? Extremely innovative and extremely change-oriented, right? So behaviors was change-oriented as a company. Motivators or value was innovative, and work styles was creative. Well, that was great for 4 years or 3.5 years. We had amazing products, but we were doing everything as one-offs. And so, as you can see here, before steps 1 through 4, on the left, we were mostly just change-oriented with some stability. But on the right side, after implementing our tool, we were able to develop people to become more stability-oriented, deliberate, reflective, steady, and cautious. The things on the left there on that right slide, as well as hire for that. So when you use tools like this, psychometrics can actually get you vibrationally and intentionally to a more specific, defined, data-driven culture of where you want to head. And for those of you sitting here and saying, well, our company defines the culture and we stay there for 20 years, here's the wake-up moment. No company has one culture. A company might have certain values, right, that go across the universe for all employees, but the way that they behave and the way they work, for example, Coca-Cola in Brazil versus Argentina, neighboring countries, you have completely different cultures at Coke, even though the values are the same, because the B and the W of BMW, completely different in those geographies. Starbucks, high-performing team of baristas in Miami, Hialeah, all Latin customers, all Latin employees. They might have the same value system, but the way Latins behave and customers expect and the way that they work, completely different than up at Starbucks in Boston or in Seattle near headquarters. And so, and then when you throw on top of that things such as external environments like COVID, moving remote, that also then changes the culture of a company instantly, and even your team. So don't think that culture is something that you print on a t-shirt, coffee mug, put on a screensaver and tell everybody to recite it and memorize it, and now everybody is your culture. That's the world before COVID and the world before psychometrics met technology. Those companies that will lead in their space and their marketplace and verticals will constantly measure culture and intentionally set it every 6 or 12 months and track it, measure it, and help people along that journey as individuals, teams, all the way up to the corporate-wide culture. Next. And then they hire for it. So once you have this data and these insights, what leads to performance in a sales role, what doesn't, you can now hire for that. If you're looking at a team like our Humantelligence 2.5 years ago, we were all mostly creative, innovative, and change-oriented, 90% of us. We had to move to more stability, deliberate, and scaling type environment as a startup. And so step 5, 6, and 7, we identified open roles, we created job objectives, but then we hired and source candidates using the target culture to select the right people for the culture that we wanted, even if we didn't love them. Because imagine if everybody has one culture in a company of 18 people at the time, if you get to 5 finalists who have the right resume and skills, well, you're going to go with the person typically that everyone likes the most, that thinks and acts like you. That does not lead to diversity of thoughts, does not lead to what our friends at Ultimate Software believe is culture add, and I give them credit for that term. And so if you want diversity of thought and culture add, then you need to know and learn and use data to help you in hiring people that are not like you, and that maybe you hire candidate A over candidate E, even though candidate A you like less than candidate E. Hiring is not about hiring people you want to go for a beer with, okay, or you know, the company picnic. It's about hiring who's going to succeed in that role for the culture you want in a role in a company or a team. Here is an example how Humantelligence for a CTO, Chief Technology Officer role, hired for people who were the right fit. Now, I don't see how to draw on this. So I'm going to try to describe what I'm looking at here. If you look, let's see here. If you look at Eliza Nicholas, the second one, although the manager at 59 orange and the team at barely 60 light green, and an ideal of 37 for the team culture, this might be a role that they want someone who's just like the other high-performing technology people, and their Alyssa's a 75. So in that case, you'd be able to go against your intuition of saying, well, I don't like them as the manager, and you know they're not a great fit like everybody else. However, Eliza at 75 would be a good fit given the high performance metric. So you can use data to start supplementing your other processes to evaluate candidates. Next.
Yeah, so that actually brings us to the end of our core presentation. We'll move into the Q&A session now. But yeah, all these links are in the chat, so you can do the remote work scorecard. You can go check that out there. You can also go to the Humantelligence site and sign up for the free trial, things like that. There's also a number of links to past webinars that we referenced on equitable and inclusive remote working situations. So we've put those in as well. That one in late January that we ran has a lot of great examples that you've probably encountered. And you know, Juan and I went through how to address those things in that webinar. So that'll move us into our Q&A. So I appreciate you staying with us today. I have a handful of questions, so let me bring those up. If you have a question, you can put it in. All right. Okay, so one person asked the question about how much time should be spent in like a morning stand-up. Juan, I'll just quick answer that, and then you can follow up, but we did in one of our past webinars, we did address that. I usually, with my team, I put it on the calendar for about 15 minutes. We usually take about 4 or 5 minutes, just cover our one most important thing we're going to be working on that day, and any blockers that, you know, your manager or anybody else on the call in the morning can help you remove in the morning. Juan, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's going to depend on your team. I think you go at it with a kind of agile approach where, you know, maybe start with, you know, 1 minute per person to talk about, you know, if it's just work related, like the one big accomplishment they did do the week before, and the one big project or thing they're working on this week, or if there's a personal, you know, as well, the one big personal news from the weekend, if it's on the early part of the week. But you'll see, I mean, if it's 20 people on a call, you can't really do much more than a minute. If it's just 5 people on your team and it's an hour meeting, then you could do 2 or 3 minutes per person and do the first quarter hour. And if it's only once a week, I mean, there used to be 2 to 3 hours a week of, you know, shooting the you know what with each other in the hallway, in the office, every week, every morning. So, you know, 15 minutes might seem like a long time, but it goes a long way to create that rapport and that connection and connectivity in a more real way. That's all we can do in this COVID constrained climate.
Cool. All right. So the next question here, Juan, can you just talk about, like, you know, the legality around doing something like this? I have a couple of questions just about, you know, using these tools and staying legal, and if it's, you know, discriminatory in any way.
Great question, and I'm assuming he means like the Humantelligence assessment and other assessment tools for psychometric. So yep. It's a really important question. Yeah, okay. So really important question. So thank you, whoever asked that. There are some assessment tools that have been scientifically validated and actually measure what they say they measure. Ours has been validated over 30 years with all the right Cronbach scores and third-party evaluation for each question, and then as a group, and can be used for not only internal employees, but also for hiring. Internal employees more for collaboration tips and leadership tips and working with each other. For hiring, more for will they be good at this role or not. Now, some tools have not been validated. And so the first thing you should always do before you work with anybody, us or anyone else, is ask for their technical validation manual. If a company and a scientific instrument for psychometrics has been validated, they will be able to provide that to you within 24 hours. If they don't or cannot, run for the hills, because that tool could get you sued, to the point of the question. Now, if they have been validated, it's still sensitive, and so you should still be careful, and here's why. Using these tools internally for existing employees, very few, if ever, have led to lawsuits. It's really in the hiring environment where there could be the risk of lawsuits. Now, if it has been a technically validated tool, well, you can never prevent someone for suing you just to sue you because they say, well, I took this test and I didn't get the job. I think they discriminated against the results, and I don't think it's accurate. Well, when going to court, the company who uses a tool like Humantelligence or others that have been validated would not lose the court case. So if the tool has been technically validated, you won't lose any lawsuits or court cases. So yes, you can use it for hiring and feel rest assured. That is not the same if a tool has not been tested and validated. Our tool, for instance, has been validated for not only adverse impact, but also for accuracy. So it's not discriminatory in any way. It's also not subjective. We're not asking someone, hey, pick from this list whether you think you're subjective or think you're deliberate or decisive. Pick if you think you are creative or structured. It's not like that. It's a rearranging of 4 answers in priority, and people don't know what we're asking, so it's hard to game. So it's more objective. And the tool does not recognize or know if it's a Hispanic, African-American, Anglo, white, Caucasian, gender non-specific, male or female, veteran, et cetera, handicap, et cetera. So, but a great question. Get a technical validation manual, and you can know that it's safe to use for recruiting and for current employees. Next.
Juan, do you foresee do you foresee organizational changes resulting from moving to a hybrid work model? Some examples would be, like, for HR policies, would would be like paid time off, performance reviews, etc. I know like one thing that I've seen is a lot of companies are trying to figure out, if somebody's in Omaha, Nebraska, do they get paid the same as San Francisco, something like that. So maybe talk to that a little bit. Do you foresee any changes in organizational changes?
Yes, that is the hottest space today. I have several CHROs and consultants from the top consulting firms like McKinsey, Bain, BCG, et cetera, that they are furiously working to figure out with large companies, HR organizations, and the small companies are also dealing with this. How do you keep pay, benefits, all equitable? Like, if the people who now commute to work, are you going to subsidize their gas because they're losing money going to work, whereas the ones working from home don't spend $30, $50 a week on gas? That ends up being $2,000 to $3,000 a year. Post tax, that's like a $6,000 to $7,000 a year difference for those who stay remote versus those who go to work, using company laptops at home or your own personal laptops, using the real estate at your home. So now companies don't have to pay for buildings, but they pay for the office at somebody's house. So these are all really complex questions that nobody has the answer to yet, and some of the largest companies and the largest consulting firms are really working hard to figure that out. So that is the frontier of kind of HR, benefits, well-being, and pay, comp and ben, like that's all going to change drastically over the next 5 years. So much more on that to come. We stayed clear of those topics because there is really right now, nobody knows definitively what works, what doesn't, and what's right and not. And then you put the legality and the legal structures, by state, there haven't been many law cases confirmed and completed, so there's not precedent, and there will be one day. So that's a real hairball of a mess that if you're sitting there, whoever asked that question and others, you're not alone. That nobody really has the answer to that yet, and we're probably 6 months away, if not longer.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's something that we'll probably address on future webinars as we start getting more and more information. For sure. I have one more really quick question because we're coming up on time here. Super quick question. Somebody from Montreal, Canada, just asked the question. Can you talk about, are the regulations the same in Canada in terms of using Humantelligence legally?
Merci pour la question. Bienvenue à la présentation. Je parlais en français pour notre ami de Montréal. So thanks for your question. And yes, we do use the same assessment in Canada. It has been validated in Canada, and we have several clients there. So it does pass the legalities needed to be used for both employees and candidates in Canada.
Perfect. All right, cool. Thanks, Juan. That brings us to the end of our presentation today, as we're out of time. So big thank you to our audience. We had a substantial group here today, so I really appreciate it, and all of the questions, tons of questions today. So it's awesome.
Yep.
Juan, thank you for joining and presenting. Thanks, Vida, to you for answering some of the questions as they were coming in there, as we didn't have time to get to all of them, but hope to see you all on our next webinar. Thank you again.
Yep, and thanks to Victoria Guzzo for putting a lot of the content and research together for the team. And thanks all of you for joining today.
Thanks.